A police officer disappears in a frozen forest, locked inside a car with a pregnant woman who's about to give birth. No signal, no backup, no way out. The engine is off. Ice water is rising. The baby is coming now. And the man who did this wants both women erased by winter. As panic turns to prayer, a single question remains. Will anyone hear them before it's too late? Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and the miracles God hides in the darkest places. Winter pressed down on Bozeman like a held breath. Snow thickened the dark, radio waves crackled with unease, and somewhere beyond the trees, a disappearance waited to be found. Sarah Mitchell drove slowly, not because the road demanded it, but because her thoughts did. The patrol car hummed beneath her hands, a familiar sound that usually steadied her. Tonight, it didn't. The radio voice, measured, professional, too calm for the words it carried, kept circling her mind like a bird that refused to land. Missing. 28 years old, pregnant, daughter-in-law of the Lawson family. The Lawsons. Money old enough to feel inevitable. Influence that bent rooms before people even spoke. Sarah had learned early in her career that wealth didn't erase fear. It only changed how loudly it screamed. Still, this case felt different. Not louder, heavier, as if the air itself had taken on weight. Sarah told herself to focus on the road. Snow glazed the asphalt, reflecting her headlights back at her in dull halos. Pine trees crowded the edges, their branches sagging under white burden, silent witnesses to whatever passed between them. She'd patrolled this stretch 100 times. It was routine, predictable, and that somehow made the tightness in her chest worse. Pregnant, the radio had said. 7 months. Sarah's hand tightened on the wheel. She thought of the way her sister had once described pregnancy, not as fragility, but as exposure. Your body no longer belonged only to you. Every choice carried 2 heartbeats. Focus, Sarah murmured, though there was no one to hear her. She turned the volume down, but the words lingered. A missing woman didn't just vanish in winter. Not like this. Not without someone helping her disappear. The patrol car's headlights swept over a narrow forest access road, half buried in snow. Sarah almost passed it. Almost. Then something caught her eye, not movement, but absence. Tracks that shouldn't have been there. Tires, faint but fresh, cutting into powder that had fallen only hours ago. She slowed. Protocol whispered in her ear. Call it in. Mark the location. Wait for backup. Instinct argued back, quietly, relentlessly. Sarah guided the car onto the access road, the tires crunching softly as if the forest resented the noise. The trees closed in fast, dark trunks rising like bars of a cage. Her headlights reached only so far before being swallowed by snow and shadow. A shape emerged ahead. Metal. Stillness. A car. It sat at an awkward angle, half off the narrow clearing, dusted with snow as if the forest had already begun to claim it. No hazard lights, no engine noise, just silence. Sarah parked a short distance back. The moment she stepped out, the cold cut through her uniform, sharp and personal. It carried a smell she didn't like, fuel, faint, but unmistakable, and something else beneath it. Fear had a scent. Sarah had learned that too. Police, she called, her voice steady, practiced. If anyone's there, call out. No answer. Her boots sank into snow as she approached. Each step felt louder than it should have been. She shone her flashlight through the windshield. The interior was empty. A purse lay on the passenger seat, strap twisted like it had been dropped in a hurry. Sarah's pulse quickened. She moved to the driver's side, checked the door. Unlocked. That was when she heard it. A sound, thin and broken, drifting from deeper in the trees. Not quite a voice. More like breath fighting its way through panic. Sarah turned, heart pounding. She followed the sound, pushing past low branches, the flashlight beam jumping with her breath. The forest seemed to lean closer, listening. Then she saw her. The woman was crouched near a fallen log, one hand braced against it, the other pressed protectively to her belly. Her coat was open, snow clinging to dark hair and trembling shoulders. When the light touched her face, her eyes widened, not with relief, but with raw terror. "It's okay," Sarah said quickly, lowering the flashlight. "You're safe. I'm here to help." The woman tried to stand, failed. A sharp gasp tore from her throat. "Please," she whispered. "He's close." Sarah knelt, careful, slow. Training guided her movements, but something older guided her voice. "You're not alone anymore. What's your name?" The woman shook her head, tears freezing on her lashes. I can't." He said. A branch snapped. Sarah's body reacted before her mind caught up. She turned, hand moving toward her radio, toward her weapon, toward all the things that made sense in daylight. She never saw the blow coming. Pain exploded behind her eyes. The world lurched sideways, snow rushing up to meet her face. A second impact followed, heavier, final. Darkness closed in fast, like water over a flame. The last thing Sarah felt was the cold seeping through her uniform and the terrible certainty that she had led herself and the woman she'd found straight into something waiting. Above them, the forest stood quiet again. Snow continued to fall, soft and patient, covering footprints, smoothing edges, pretending nothing had happened at all. Snow deepened its silence in the forest, pressing down on breath, memory, and time as two lives lay broken beneath the trees and the night decided what it would keep. Sarah Mitchell came back to consciousness in fragments, not as a moment, but as a slow assembling of pain, cold, and sound. The first thing she felt was the weight of her own body pressed into snow. The second was the ache behind her eyes, and the third was the wrongness of being unable to move her hands. Panic surged, sharp and immediate, but training rose to meet it, forcing the fear to wait its turn. She breathed shallowly through her nose, tasting blood and frost, listening instead of struggling. Somewhere close, another breath rasped, uneven and desperate. The woman, the pregnant woman. Memory snapped into place with cruel clarity, and guilt followed fast, heavy as the winter sky. Sarah had found her, yes, but she had also led danger straight to her. That thought burned hotter than the cold. A shadow moved at the edge of her vision, blocking the faint starlight filtering through branches. Boots crunched, slow, unhurried. Sarah kept her eyes half-lidded, letting the world believe she was still gone. She recognized the cadence before she recognized the man. Jason Reed did not rush. He never had. He had always moved, like time belonged to him, like urgency was something other people needed. The realization hit her not as shock, but as a hollowing certainty. Of course it was him. Of course the man who had always known where the blind spots were would stand in one now. Jason's voice cut through the night, low and controlled, speaking to the woman first, not to Sarah. He told her to be quiet. He told her everything would be over soon. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Sarah felt something twist inside her chest at the familiarity of that tone, the same one he used in interrogation rooms, the same one that made people believe compliance was safer than resistance. She wanted to scream a warning, but her jaw ached, her head swam, and the woman's breathing told her screaming would only make things worse. Jason knelt. Sarah sensed him closer now, felt the disturbance in the air, the way predators change the space around them. He checked her pulse with practiced fingers. For a moment she thought he might realize she was awake, that he might look closer, but he withdrew his hand without comment. That hurt more than the blow had. To him, she was already a solved problem. The woman tried to speak. Her voice broke on the first word. Jason answered her with a sigh, not of anger, but of inconvenience. He told her she should not have run. He told her fear made people sloppy. Sarah listened, cataloging every word, every shift in weight, every choice. She noticed how he avoided looking directly at the woman's stomach, how his gaze flicked away as if acknowledging it would complicate something he preferred simple. He bound their wrists with efficient movements, tight enough to hurt, loose enough to preserve circulation. He was careful. That scared her more than cruelty would have. When he lifted Sarah, the world lurched, pain blooming white-hot before settling into a dull roar. She forced herself to remain limp, counting steps, tracking direction by slope and sound, trees to the left, open space ahead, wind rising. The woman whimpered when Jason pulled her to her feet. Sarah wanted to tell her to save her strength, wanted to promise this would not end here, but promises felt fragile in a place like this. Jason guided them to a vehicle Sarah had not seen before, parked deeper than the abandoned car, positioned with intent. He opened the back, pushed them inside, and closed the door with a finality that echoed. Darkness swallowed them. The space smelled of cold metal and old fuel. The woman's breathing grew erratic, fast and shallow, panic building toward something dangerous. Sarah shifted as much as the bindings allowed and pressed her shoulder gently against the woman's arm, a wordless signal of presence. She spoke then, quietly, carefully, choosing each word like a stepping stone across ice. She told the woman to breathe with her. She counted under her breath. She said her own name, grounding herself so the other woman could follow. The woman whispered hers in return, a sound barely there, as if saying it aloud might take it away. Outside, the engine started. Sarah felt the vibration through her bones. The vehicle moved, slow at first, then faster, tires crunching over snow. With motion came certainty. Jason was not taking them somewhere to wait. He was taking them somewhere to end. Sarah's thoughts raced, not toward escape yet, but toward understanding. Why now? Why this woman? The answer slid into place with sickening ease. The Lawsons were not just wealthy. They were leverage. The woman was not collateral. She was currency, and Sarah was a liability who had stumbled too close. Rage flared, hot and useless, but beneath it lay something steadier. Resolve. She had been wrong before, had trusted where she should have questioned, but she was not finished. Not here. Not like this. The vehicle slowed. Wind howled louder. Sarah felt the angle change beneath them, the road narrowing, the ground dropping away. Ice sang under tires, a high, keening sound that vibrated through her skull. The woman cried out, clutching her stomach as the first hard contraction rippled through her body, fear sharpening into pain. Sarah turned toward her as much as she could, heart hammering, mind already leaping ahead, calculating seconds and damage, and the thin line between survival and loss. The car lurched, skidded, and for one suspended moment, gravity seemed to hesitate. Sarah understood then fully what Jason intended, and the knowledge was colder than the air. As the world tipped and the engine roared uselessly against slipping ice, Sarah locked eyes with the woman beside her and made a silent vow that this story would not end in the dark. The road ended where ice ruled, wind carving its voice into stone and frozen water, a place chosen not for escape, but for forgetting. The first impact came as a shudder through the frame, a warning disguised as motion, and Sarah Mitchell knew before it happened that the plan had crossed its final line. The vehicle lurched onto the frozen descent, tires losing conversation with the ground, momentum taking over with a confidence that no human hand could correct. Jason Reed said nothing. He did not need to. Silence was the punctuation he trusted most. Sarah felt the restraints bite as gravity claimed them, her shoulder slamming into metal, pain flaring and then receding beneath a deeper fear that steadied rather than scattered her thoughts. She counted anyway, breaths and seconds, because counting was something she could still do. The pregnant woman cried out, the sound sharp and animal, a cry pulled from the body when language failed. Sarah turned toward her as much as the bindings allowed, heart racing with the understanding that this descent was not a threat, but an execution written in physics. The vehicle slid, struck ice hard enough to steal air from lungs, and tipped, a slow, terrible roll that ended with the world inverted and water rushing in like a decision already made. Cold exploded through the cabin, not as a wave, but as an invasion, finding every opening, seizing breath mid-inhale, burning like fire that refused to look like fire. Sarah's thoughts narrowed, sharpened, the way they had during other crises, when fear tried to claim the wheel, and she had learned to keep her hands steady. She kicked once at a door, felt resistance answer back with indifferent strength, and stopped before panic could waste what little time remained. The woman beside her thrashed, choking as icy water surged to her chest, then higher, her cries dissolving into gasps that tore at Sarah's composure. Sarah forced her voice low and firm, speaking into chaos, because it was the only anchor she had left, telling the woman to look at her, to breathe, when possible, to listen. The woman's hands clutched at her stomach, terror sharpening into something worse as pain rippled through her body with sudden force. Sarah saw it in her face, recognized the shift with a jolt of dread. The cold had shocked her system, water in her lungs had stolen rhythm from breath, and now the child inside her was demanding the world on terms the world was not prepared to offer. A contraction hit hard enough to arch her back, despite the restraints, a sound tearing free from her throat that made Sarah's chest ache with helplessness. The water climbed, black and merciless, claiming the floor that had become the ceiling, pressing down with the patient strength of ice that knew it would win if given time. Sarah tilted her head to keep her mouth clear, jaw trembling, not from fear, but from effort, every muscle screaming as she fought the instinct to thrash. She thought of training manuals and protocols and how none of them spoke to this, to being bound beside a woman in labor beneath frozen water while a man they had trusted walked away. Rage rose, hot and bright, and she let it, because rage meant she was still here. She shifted closer, pressing her shoulder to the woman's arm again, a promise without words, and spoke through chattering teeth, telling her the pain had a reason, that the body knew how to do this, even when the world turned hostile. The woman's eyes found Sarah's, wide and pleading, and in them Sarah saw the terrible arithmetic of motherhood distilled to a single truth. Survival was no longer singular. Another contraction tore through, longer this time, dragging a sob from the woman that ended in coughing as water forced its way past lips that could not seal fast enough. Sarah's own breath came shallow now, chest burning, vision narrowing at the edges, but she focused on the woman's face, on keeping her present, because if one of them disappeared into shock, the other would follow. She tested the restraints again, wrists numb, fingers clumsy, and felt a sliver of give she could not use yet. Not without leverage, not without air. The vehicle groaned as it settled deeper, ice above them cracking with a sound like distant gunfire, and Sarah imagined the river claiming them fully, erasing evidence with the same efficiency that had been planned. She refused the image, shoved it aside, and anchored herself to what remained within reach. She spoke of names, of the child, of the sound a first cry makes, even as the woman shook her head in disbelief, pain and fear conspiring to tell her those things belonged to another life. Another contraction hit, closer now, and Sarah felt the shift with grim clarity. This was happening, here, now. The cold did not care. The river did not pause. Sarah drew in a breath that scraped her lungs raw and made a decision that felt less like bravery than necessity. If the bindings could not be broken yet, then panic would have to be. She slowed her voice, lowered it until it cut through the roar of blood in her ears, and counted aloud, grounding the woman to something that was not pain, not water, not the dark pressing in. The woman followed barely, her breaths ragged, her body trembling as another wave rolled through her. The water reached Sarah's chin. She lifted her head higher, neck straining, and tasted metal and cold and resolve. She thought of the radio voice from earlier, of how ordinary the world had sounded when it announced a disappearance, and understood with sudden, fierce certainty that stories did not end where people decided they should. As the ice above them cracked again and the vehicle shifted, Sarah felt the binding strain under the weight of movement, a whisper of possibility she could not yet seize but would not forget. The woman cried out once more, a sound that was half pain and half defiance, and Sarah held onto it like a lifeline as the river pressed closer and the night waited to see which of them would yield first. Dawn never came, only a thinning of darkness as wind scoured the ravine, and the frozen river held its breath, waiting for something stubborn enough to notice what the night tried to erase. Sarah Mitchell was no longer sure where her body ended and the cold began, only that she was still thinking, and that meant she was still here. The water had risen to her jaw and steadied there, pressing with a patience that felt intelligent, as if the river understood time better than she did. She kept her head tilted, lips barely clear, every breath a careful theft. Beside her, the woman convulsed with another contraction, a sound tearing free that cut through the hiss of water and ice. Sarah answered it instinctively, lowering her voice again, counting, naming what hurt and what would pass, because naming things made them smaller. Her wrists burned where the bindings had shifted under the impact. She tested them again and felt the same whisper of give, nothing she could use yet, but enough to keep hope alive. The ice above cracked once more, closer now, a brittle report that echoed through her skull. She thought of how easily the world forgot, how quickly winter smoothed over violence, and felt anger flare bright enough to warm her for a heartbeat. Then something else entered the soundscape, subtle at first, a wrongness in the wind that did not belong to water or ice, a pressure change, a living rhythm moving against the storm. Sarah stilled, listening past her own pulse. The woman gasped again, clutching her stomach, eyes wide with the knowledge that her body had chosen now, of all times. Sarah nodded at her, a promise she did not yet know how to keep. The sound came again, clearer, closer, not a voice but a certainty, a presence that cut across the river's patient claim. Above them, on the slope, a figure moved with the economy of someone who did not waste steps on fear. Jack Miller had learned long ago that winter rewarded attention and punished hurry, and as he followed the pull that had stopped him mid-stride, he trusted the sense that had kept him alive when maps lied. The forest had gone quiet in the way it did before things broke. He felt it in his chest before he saw it in the way the snow bent oddly near the river's edge. He knelt, palm to ice, reading vibrations like a language he had never unlearned, and felt the hollow beneath. A life did that. 2 lives did that more. The dog at his side stiffened, every instinct tightening into a single direction, not fear but focus, the old work humming back to life without a word. Jack followed the line of that attention and saw the shape under the ice, wrong and metallic, a vehicle settled where it did not belong, and the faintest movement inside it that the night had failed to swallow. He did not think of medals or consequences or how improbable rescue always sounded after the fact. He thought of leverage and time and what cold respected. He spread his weight low, testing the surface, inching closer as the ice answered with a protest that did not yet mean no. Below, Sarah saw a shadow pass over the pale glow filtering through fractured ice, felt the pressure shift, and dared to believe it meant something other than collapse. She forced herself to stay still, to not waste breath on calling out, trusting that whatever had come would do so because it knew how to listen. The dog's presence registered first for her not as a shape, but as a change in the air, a steadiness that cut through panic like a hand on the shoulder. The woman felt it too, and sobbed once, a sound half hope and half pain, as another contraction took her and stole what breath she had. Jack worked without drama, finding the seam where door met frame, testing, prying with care, because care was faster than force when ice was involved. Water surged as metal shifted, black and hungry, and Sarah clenched her jaw, riding the cold as the opening widened enough for hands to reach in. Jack's voice came then, calm and precise, a voice used to speaking into chaos without asking permission, telling them to stay, to look at him, to breathe when they could. Sarah locked onto it, let it anchor her, and when he cut the belt that had kept her inverted, she braced, took the shock through clenched muscles, and helped guide the woman's weight as they were eased free of the trap that had been designed to finish them. The ice sang under pressure, and Jack froze, breath held, waiting for the surface to decide, then moved again when it allowed him to. He pulled them onto the ice, dragging them clear as the vehicle settled deeper with a groan that felt final. The dog pressed close at once, not crowding, simply there, a wall against the wind, a reminder that warmth could still be shared. Sarah lay gasping, lungs on fire, hands numb and shaking, as the cold finally registered the loss of its prize. She turned her head toward the woman, who was crying now, not in fear but in pain sharpened by relief, hands clutching her belly as the rhythm of labor asserted itself with a terrible insistence. Jack saw it in her face and understood without explanation. Some emergencies did not wait for transport or daylight. He wrapped them both in what he had, working fast and gently, because speed mattered and gentleness did too, and nodded once to the dog, who scanned the tree line not for enemies but for the next instruction the world might offer. As Jack lifted, careful of ice and breath, and the fragile calculus of heat, Sarah found her voice again, hoarse but steady, telling the woman to stay with her, to focus on what came next, because next was something they could still reach. The river hissed behind them, disappointed, and the ravine kept its secrets for another hour, while above it all the storm shifted, as storms do, making room for consequences that could no longer be buried. The cabin crouched against the mountain like a stubborn memory, its windows rimmed with frost, its door groaning as wind tested what little warmth still dared to exist inside. Jack Miller kicked the door shut with his heel and leaned into it for a second longer than necessary, not out of fatigue but calculation, listening to the storm decide whether it would follow them in. The smell inside was old wood, iron and cold, that had learned the shape of the room. Sarah Mitchell registered it all dimly as Jack lowered them to the floor, her body shaking now that motion had stopped, the delayed reckoning of adrenaline giving way to pain. She focused on staying upright, on keeping her thoughts ordered, because chaos was contagious and the woman beside her had no room left for it. The pregnant woman cried out again, a sound stripped of restraint, and Sarah felt the answer in her own bones, a deep understanding that this was no longer a question of rescue, but of arrival. Jack moved with a quiet urgency that felt earned, not rushed, lighting the stove with hands that remembered worse nights, worse odds, and how panic wasted oxygen. Rex paced once, twice, then settled close without instruction, a presence that changed the temperature of the room simply by refusing to leave. Sarah noticed how the dog's attention never drifted, how it tracked breath and sound, how it seemed to know that this was work of the kind that did not wear uniforms. The woman's contractions came faster now, stacking without mercy, each one pulling a cry from her that ended in a gasp as cold air clawed at lungs already abused by ice water. Sarah crawled closer, ignoring the protest of her wrists and ribs, and took the woman's hand, grounding her with pressure and voice. She said her own name again, then asked for the woman's, insisted on it, because names anchored people when pain tried to scatter them. The woman gave it between breaths, tears streaking down her face, disbelief and terror fighting for dominance, as her body pushed her toward a moment she had imagined 100 safer ways. Jack listened without interrupting, absorbing what mattered, discarding what didn't, then knelt where he could see both faces. He did not pretend this would be easy. He did not soften the truth. He said only that they would do what had to be done, here, now, together. Sarah felt something steady inside her at that, a quiet alignment of purpose that cut through the ache. She had been trained for emergencies, had responded to births in bathrooms and roadside ditches, but never like this, never with the cold gnawing at fingers and the knowledge that minutes earlier they had been nearly erased. The woman screamed as another contraction tore through, body bowing despite the blankets Jack had layered over her, and Sarah guided her breathing, counting, coaxing, because counting gave the mind something to hold when pain demanded everything. Rex pressed closer, not touching where it would intrude, but near enough that warmth and certainty flowed, his presence a low, unwavering note beneath the storm's howl. Jack adjusted the fire, careful not to rush heat into skin that had known ice too intimately, then turned back, sleeves rolled, voice low and precise. Time stretched and snapped in strange ways, seconds elongating into lifetimes, then collapsing into a single breath. Sarah felt her own exhaustion tugging at the edges of focus, but she refused it, tethered herself to the woman's face, to the rhythm of labor that was now undeniable, unstoppable. When the moment came, it did not announce itself with ceremony. It arrived with urgency and blood, and a cry torn from deep places, and Sarah found herself acting without thought, hands steady, because there was no room for tremor. Jack supported, guided, adjusted, his calm a scaffolding that held the room together as the storm battered the walls in frustrated applause. The woman's scream broke into a sob as pressure gave way to release, and then, impossibly, a sound cut through everything else, thin and furious and alive. A baby's cry. It sliced the cold open like a blade and filled the cabin with something that had weight and warmth and insistence. Sarah laughed once, a broken sound that startled her as much as anyone, tears freezing on her cheeks as Jack wrapped the newborn with care that bordered on reverence. Rex lifted his head, alert, ears angled not in alarm but attention, as if committing this sound to memory. The woman collapsed back against the blankets, sobbing openly now, one hand clutching Sarah's sleeve, the other reaching blindly until Jack placed the bundled weight against her chest. The baby quieted almost at once, drawn by heartbeat and warmth, and the room changed. The storm still raged, the cold still pressed at the windows, but something had shifted irreversibly. Sarah sagged then, the cost of staying upright finally exacted, and Jack caught her shoulder, steadying without comment, understanding the language of limits. He checked the baby, the mother, his movements efficient but gentle, then nodded once, a verdict delivered without words, alive. For now, that was everything. Rex settled again, body angled to shield, eyes tracking shadows not because danger lurked, but because vigilance had been asked of him long ago, and he had never learned how to refuse. Sarah leaned back against the wall, chest tight with relief and pain, and a fierce gratitude that made her hands tremble more than the cold ever had. She thought of the river and the ice and the man who had pushed them toward silence, and felt resolve knit itself through exhaustion. This life had arrived despite plans made to prevent it. That mattered. Outside, the wind shifted, as storms eventually did, and in the small cabin the fire caught stronger, throwing light that reached faces and made them real again. Jack looked toward the door, calculating distances, time, what daylight might bring, and Sarah followed his gaze, understanding that survival had bought them a next step, not an ending. The baby slept, the mother breathed, the dog watched, and beyond the walls the world waited to see what would be done with what had been saved. Morning arrived without warmth, a pale winter light slipping through cloud and branch, revealing a world scrubbed raw by snow and waiting for consequences to catch up. Sarah Mitchell woke to pain arranged in layers, each one announcing itself with professional precision, ribs aching, wrists stiff, lungs still protesting the memory of ice, yet beneath it all ran a steady current of awareness that told her she had not failed. The cabin was quiet in the way places became quiet after something irrevocable had happened. The fire had burned down to coals. The air carried the clean bite of cold mixed with wood smoke. And somewhere close, a new rhythm breathed, small but insistent. She turned her head carefully and saw the woman asleep against the wall, bundled and pale. The newborn pressed to her chest, rising and falling, as if the world had always been this narrow and this necessary. The sight loosened something inside Sarah that she had been holding shut since the river, since the first crack of ice. Relief came sharp and unwelcome, threatening to collapse her into uselessness, and she forced it back, because relief was a luxury she could not yet afford. Jack Miller was awake, standing near the window, shoulders squared as he scanned the tree line, not for danger exactly, but for change. He acknowledged her with a nod that carried no ceremony, only recognition, as if waking alive had been an expected outcome that did not require commentary. Rex lay between them and the door, eyes open, posture relaxed, but alert, the past humming quietly inside him, the part that understood waiting as a form of work. Sarah pushed herself upright inch by inch, jaw clenched against the protest of her body, and reached for her radio. Static answered first, then nothing. She tried again, adjusting position, angling the antenna toward the window, toward the sky, toward anywhere that might still remember how to listen. A thin signal flickered, weak but present, and she held her breath, speaking low and steady, identifying herself, reporting the essentials without drama. Officer injured, civilian recovered, infant delivered, immediate assistance required. She did not name Jason Reed yet. Names had weight, and she wanted leverage before she used it. The radio crackled back with acknowledgement, distant but real, and Sarah closed her eyes for one count, letting that fact settle. Help was not here yet, but it was moving, and movement mattered. Jack listened without interrupting, absorbing the shape of the situation as it expanded beyond the cabin walls. When Sarah finished, she told him everything else, the parts that did not fit into neat transmissions, the way Jason had moved, the timing, the calculation, the certainty that this had never been about panic or impulse. She spoke of the Lawsons, of leverage, of how wealth attracted gravity that pulled terrible things into orbit. Jack did not ask questions that wasted time. He asked where the vehicle had come from, where Jason would go next, where the river met roads that led somewhere useful. Sarah closed her eyes and mapped it, memory aligning with instinct, the forest no longer a maze but a ledger of choices made and not made. She pointed on the map Jack unfolded on the table, a rough thing with creases, softened by use, and traced a route that avoided towns and favored silence. Jack nodded once. It matched what he already suspected. Outside, the storm had moved on, but winter remained, the kind that punished complacency more than courage. Rex rose when Jack moved, not waiting for command, reading the shift in purpose the way he always had. Sarah watched them and felt a strange steadiness settle in her chest. She had spent years believing trust was something earned through systems and badges and process. The last 12 hours had stripped that belief down to its bones. Trust, she realized, was what happened when action aligned with need, when people did the next right thing without asking who would be watching. She checked the woman and the baby again, adjusting blankets, speaking softly, promising nothing she could not deliver. The woman's eyes opened, fear flickering before recognition calmed it, and she whispered thanks that felt too small for the space it tried to fill. Sarah squeezed her hand and told her the truth instead, that staying alive had been the hardest part, and she had done it. When the sound of engines finally cut through the quiet, distant at first, then closer, Sarah felt the familiar tightening of transition, the shift from survival to accountability. Jack stepped outside to guide them in, Rex at his side, and Sarah braced herself for uniforms and questions and the careful disbelief that often followed stories that sounded too sharp to be real. She met it head-on, delivering facts cleanly, refusing to let exhaustion soften edges that needed to cut. She named Jason Reed then, watched the reaction ripple through faces that had not yet decided what they believed, and felt a grim satisfaction in the certainty that this name would not disappear into snow. As preparations were made to move the mother and child, Sarah pulled Jack aside, voice low, urgency threading through fatigue. Jason would not wait to see if Winter finished the job this time. He would move, he would clean, he would try to disappear. Jack met her gaze and said what she already knew, that waiting was a choice, and sometimes the wrong one. They did not argue. They did not need to. The plan formed in the space between breaths, shaped by terrain and timing, and the understanding that the truth, once disturbed, tended to float. Rex watched them, tail still, attention fixed, the old work humming louder now. As the convoy turned down the mountain, Sarah looked back at the cabin one last time, at the small square of warmth that had held when everything else had given way, and felt the weight of what came next settle onto her shoulders. She was not done. Not with Jason. Not with the machinery that had tried to erase a mother and a child and a night's worth of witnesses. The road ahead narrowed into something that felt inevitable, and Sarah welcomed it, because inevitability, she had learned, could be met head-on if you were willing to keep walking. Winter loosened its grip on the mountain as gray daylight spread across the valley, revealing roads, frozen water, and the marks left by choices that could no longer be hidden. Sarah Mitchell felt the cold differently now, no longer as an enemy pressing in from all sides, but as a reminder that she was still standing inside the aftermath. The convoy moved slowly down from the cabin, emergency lights muted against snow, the newborn secured against its mother's chest, breathing steady enough to feel miraculous. Sarah rode in silence, mind already ahead of the vehicle, replaying Jason Reed's movements, his timing, the way he had trusted Winter to erase what he started. She knew men like him did not wait for consequences. They ran, cleaned, reshaped the narrative before anyone else could speak. When they reached the edge of town, she asked to be dropped near the old service road that cut toward the river basin. Jack Miller understood without explanation. Some endings were not meant to be witnessed by a crowd. Rex sensed the shift too, that tightening of purpose that preceded action, and settled into it without hesitation, the past stirring in him not as fear, but as readiness. Sarah followed the tracks she had memorized in the night, the map in her head clearer now that daylight stripped away illusions. They found Jason near the abandoned maintenance yard, where road crews once waited out storms, his vehicle angled for a quick escape, engine cold, the confidence of someone who believed he still had time. Sarah did not announce herself at first. She let him see her step into view, alive, deliberate, the proof Winter had failed him. The shock on his face lasted only a heartbeat before calculation returned, but it was enough. He spoke then, not to threaten, but to bargain, invoking systems and misunderstandings, the familiar language of men who believed truth was negotiable. Sarah listened because listening cost nothing, and because it allowed her to hear the cracks beneath his words. She thought of the river, of the woman's screams turning into a child's first breath, of the weight of that sound settling into the world. She told Jason the bargain was already over. When he moved, it was not fast enough. Jack closed the distance with economy, Rex breaking in the opposite direction to cut off retreat, the old choreography returning as if it had never left them. Jason fell to the ground with the same stunned disbelief he had once inspired in others, wrists bound, voice finally raised in anger that came too late to matter. Law enforcement arrived moments later, drawn by coordinates Sarah had sent ahead, their questions brisk, their disbelief brief, once evidence surfaced from the vehicle, from the river, from the woman who would testify with a child sleeping against her heart. As Jason was led away, Sarah felt no triumph, only a quiet settling, the sense that something misaligned had been forced back into place. She returned to the hospital that evening, stood beside the woman, and watched her hold her child, watched fear soften into exhaustion and then into something like peace. Words of thanks passed between them but felt insufficient, so Sarah let them go. In the days that followed, statements were taken, headlines rose and fell, and the Lawsons' influence bent toward accountability rather than concealment. Jack declined interviews, paperwork handled with minimal ceremony, his choice to return to the quiet of the mountains respected without comment. Rex stayed close, the work complete, vigilance easing into watchfulness. On Sarah's first night back on patrol, she drove the same stretch of road where winter had tried to decide her fate, and felt the weight of it without being crushed. She understood now that survival did not end with rescue or arrest. It continued in the willingness to carry truth forward, even when silence would be easier. As snow fell again, lighter this time, Sarah adjusted the radio and listened to ordinary calls pass through the air, ordinary lives moving on, and allowed herself a single, steady breath. The story had been closed not by forgetting, but by choosing to remember exactly what it had taken to keep a mother and child alive, and by refusing to let the cold have the last word. Sometimes miracles do not arrive with thunder or parted skies. Sometimes they come quietly, carried through frozen nights by ordinary people who choose courage when fear would be easier. In the darkest moments, God's hand is often hidden in small mercies, a life spared, a child's first breath, a stranger who refuses to walk away. This story reminds us that even when the world feels cold and unjust, we are never truly alone. Faith shows up in action, in compassion, in the decision to do what is right when no one is watching. As you return to your own daily life, remember that you may be the answer to someone else's prayer. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment to let us know where you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of faith, courage, and second chances. May God bless you, protect your loved ones, guide your steps, and keep His light with you through every storm. Amen.